Make it stop, Sam. Please make it stop. I'm talking about these social media keyboard warriors who are criticizing my mayor and council, and now they're texting me and calling me at all hours of night.
Joe, calm down. I've got a solution.
What? Please, it's a nightmare.
Social media training for local elected officials.
Okay, I'm buying what you're selling. Tell me more.
We know that the elected officials actually are the culprits, right? They're the ones that get spun up, and they're the ones that are causing problems. So what if we could train them to rethink the way they see social media?
You mean to not overreact and drive us crazy?
Exactly. To understand that these people are not actually representative of the community, and to really learn how to deal with the keyboard warriors appropriately, which means not calling your city manager at 3:00 in the morning.
I love it. Tell me how we can learn more, how we can get signed up. I need this now.
So if you go to civysocial.com/AAME, you can learn all about the program, sign up your local elected officials, and get a really super special discount because you're a listener to this podcast.
I love it. Hey, if you are a city manager with a social media problem, check out Sam Tolles at civysocial.com/AAME. All right. I'm Joe Turner, and this is the City Manager Unfiltered Podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America. And with me today for our second installment of the Black City Manager is Troy Body. We are working on an experiment. We're doing reoccurring interviews where he might be launching his own podcast, or maybe we're just going to have a reoccurring series on this podcast. But Troy, welcome back to the show. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Joe. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, I thought the first episode obviously was unstructured and we're kind of going by the seat of our pants, and I thought it turned out really well. I'm really curious to see what kind of feedback to be very candid with the audience. We are recording these episodes back to back, so there's no lag time in between the first and second one. I won't get any feedback on the first episode until after that episode obviously airs and after this one's already been recorded. So I'm really curious to see what kind of feedback we got. But why don't we move forward? You kind of touched on some things on that last episode that I wanted to segue into in this discussion. And that is the conversation we had about the thematic elements of the Black City Manager's LinkedIn content, whereby at the macro 30,000 foot level, a lot of what you're talking about is universally applicable to all city managers, regardless of their race or gender, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I think that's being a little naive, right? I think there's some elements, obviously, on the margins where things are different and substantively different, and we have to acknowledge that. And I'm kind of curious to get your take on this. Obviously, you're a Black City Manager in Hopkinsville. I don't think are you the first Black City Manager in Hopkinsville, Kentucky?
Yes.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yes.
I think you're like the first Black press secretary for a governor in Kentucky.
Governor Ernie Fletcher, a great man.
Okay. I forgot about whether or not you're the first Black City Manager in Kentucky. So I have a question for you.
I don't know if I'm the first ever in Kentucky. I'm the first for Hopkinsville.
Yes.
Currently, I am the only one in Kentucky.
Okay, fair enough. We have to get my crack staff, my team, alluding back to the first episode, to do some research on that and see if you're the first or not. But can you speak to the pressure that you may place, not only the pressure you might place upon yourself as a Black City Manager, but maybe the pressure that might come from other quarters, other stakeholders, or other groups? I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on that. I'd like to hear your riff on that a little bit.
There is a self-imposed pressure, and I would say probably a lot of your Black city managers and Black executives across the board, if they're out there for the first time in those positions, particularly publicly, have imposed upon themselves. And I'm just going to say it should impose upon themselves. I don't want to do anything, to embarrass the trust that the mayor, the council, and this community put in me to represent them. And that's just general, regardless of race. But then for the Black community, I do feel there's another of I don't want to embarrass them as well, because I don't want to do anything that would make anyone hesitant to hire a Black city manager anywhere ever in Kentucky, or a Black press secretary. And definitely not because of me. It is self-imposed for my family and for myself and for the people who put their trust and confidence in me. I take the job very seriously. Any of the public jobs I've had in Kentucky, or In the commissioner position I had in West Virginia, I take it very seriously that they would bestow that trust upon me. And we have to hold ourselves to a very difficult and high standard.
I get what you just said a second ago, right? Because obviously there's a basic minimal expectation that every executive should have that, hey, I want to do competent work, right? I want to make
Mhm.
the people that hired me look good. I want them to feel like they hired an executive who knows what they're doing, who's getting results, and I understand that. And then you also talked about the element of personal pressure in terms of wanting to make sure that you don't fail or bungle through your job because you don't want that to have a negative impression on the next person, the next black person who might come behind you looking for that position, right?
Absolutely.
Do you feel though that outside of that personal sense of pressure or self-imposed pressure, have you ever felt like that you have other sorts of pressure points coming from you from other aspects of either the community or other social strata? I'm just kind of curious about that dynamic.
Raul Cunningham, who was the president of the state of Kentucky's NAACP and simultaneously the president of the NAACP for the city of Louisville, and then at some point he held those jobs concurrently. He used to have these meetings where he'd say, "It's time to have an US's meeting." And by us's, he would say just us, where he would have the black community in Louisville saying, "You get behind closed doors." And here comes the finger wagging where Raul would say, "We're messing up." And if you knew Raul, he's 80 something years old. He could be, and a lot of political and government experience on the federal and state and local level. Very smart guy. He'd tell us when we're doing wrong. And he'd shut that door and go, "It's just us. I'm going to be very direct." And I learned a lot from that because he knew we had to hold ourselves to a higher standard and to deliver. Are there some pressures? I've been told by one elected official that like some members of the black community were upset with me and he didn't go into detail, but I thought, what is it? Why didn't they come speak to me? What
Hmm.
is it that they want from me that I'm not doing? Is it legitimate or is it my philosophy of I'm going to hold us all to a higher standard and I'm going to hold the neighborhood to a standard and it's applied applicably across the city of we're going to do every neighborhood the same and all the 32,000 residents are my boss or when I work for the state of Kentucky 4.4 million residents are my boss and I'm going to do the best work for everybody across the board. The mayor that told me, yeah, you got some in the black community that are upset with me, he didn't elaborate. And I'm definitely open for that meeting. I've definitely had loads of black residents that come in and speak to me about this issue or that issue in their neighborhood. And we don't always agree on the approach, but we agree that something must be done. And on our end as a city government official, we're going to do all that we can. That is our role. But if your listeners go back to the previous episode, I talk about being met halfway. That I can't love your family and your home and your neighborhood more than you. And no matter how hard I try, I'll fail. You're going to have to meet me halfway. So if there's an issue, tell me what it is. I'm going to tell you what my role is, what I can do, and that is all I can do.
Do
And
you do you
go
ever
ahead.
feel like the expectations placed upon you by the black community in whatever community or state that you're working in, do you feel like those expectations are fair expectations, or do you feel like, or maybe you feel like sometimes they're completely unfair and unrealistic, and other times they're overly generous and benefit of the doubt? I'm just kind of curious about that dynamic. I mean, obviously, as a white guy, I have no clue, right? I mean, when I go into a position, Troy, and I take a city manager job or whatever, um, I'm never thinking about, oh, my performance is going to could have a positive or negative impact on white people. Like that just never enters into my brain, right? I mean, that just never even occurs. I have the individualized self-imposed pressure, right, of wanting to perform to a certain level of excellence or wanting to make those that hired me look good and feel good about the decision that they
Absolutely.
entrusted in me, obviously, right? But I don't have any racial hangups. That's just nothing that's ever been an issue for me, obviously, as a white guy in America. So I'm kind of curious, do you feel like, I guess at times, do you get home team cooking Meaning sometimes it's like daddy goggles at the little league park where your kids could do no wrong because by the black community, or do you feel like it's the reverse where no, you're held to even higher, tougher standard because you're one of us? I mean, what's that
I'm
journey like?
absolutely going to go with the latter. I'm definitely going to say I'm being held to a standard, and I'm good with that. Like I said to you about being a quality of life officer, I want the demands. If they're reasonable, if it's government related, I want it from neighborhood to neighborhood. Hold me accountable. I'm absolutely good with that. Have I had some unfair judgment? You betcha. And you wouldn't even have me here if you thought I was going to blow smoke your way. When I worked for governor, he was Fletcher. He was the first Republican governor in the state of Kentucky in 40 years. We hadn't had one Republican since Louis B. Nunn in 1968. And the thing is, I am registered, and I don't mind sharing this, non politically affiliated. So when I say to people, well, I'm not in a political party, their first response is, oh, you're an independent. No, independent is a party.
Hmm.
It's a registered political party. I am registered non-politically affiliated. So I'm not able to vote in Kentucky in primaries. I can
Oh,
only
you guys
vote.
have a closed primary system in Kentucky?
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
can only vote in the general election. But when I worked for Fletcher as the first Republicans, I had several in the black community, and even within my own family, who go, well, what's that? Well, what is that? There's me believing that this is the best man for the job, and I'm all 100% behind him, and I'm going to support him. And not only did I support him, I became a mouthpiece for him and his administration. And did I have some black folks in the black community have a problem with me working with and for the Republican Party? You betcha. A few, even in my own family. But I came from a very strong willed mother and a very independent mother, and I drew on that. I did what I thought was in the best interest of my state. I still say Governor Fletcher is one of the best men I've ever worked for, and take his call any day, any time. And yeah, I caught flack for it.
Mm.
The president that I mentioned of the NAAC before, Raul Cunningham, he and I would meet on a regular basis. And he was very candid with me about there are some in the state legislature or some in the black community, particularly in Louisville, that have some issues with you. Okay. I don't know what else to do.
Yeah.
Okay. I used to walk to church growing up in the mountains of Harlan County, Kentucky. I went to First Baptist Church on North Main Street. And I used to walk to church with my superintendent of my Sunday school named Mr. Philip Fluker. And the reason I walk with him is because his grandchildren, my friends, were never ready for church. And he'd get so angry, he'd yell at them. And quite frankly, he'd curse at them. And then he said, come on, Troy. And I had to walk to church with him. But he had told me, he'd give me these little life lessons about, being myself and doing what's right. And he used to tell me things like, don't do anything today that you're going to regret tomorrow. Don't make any kind of decisions. And I had a sense of self walking to church with that man. I could almost write a little booklet from it. And I knew who I was. And in terms of people not liking me for making some decisions like that, I couldn't get over it. And I brought up his name because I want you to hear this. Like most small black churches, they're ran by women, particularly in the South and in Appalachia. The women, um, if we had to rely just on the men, we wouldn't get anything done. So the women always in our
They're the
churches.
social glue, right? They're the social glue.
Yeah, they were
Yeah.
ran by women, and there was something going on at the church that it wasn't right or getting done or something. I said, those ladies at that church, Brother Fluke, they're going to eat you up. And I just said it jabbing him. I was just teasing him, but he stopped. He stopped in the middle of the street on our walk to church. He never drove, lived to be almost 90, I believe, and never drove a car. And he said, listen to me, nobody knows what I say to my God when I'm on my knees in prayer. And nobody knows what my God says to me. And I never forgot that because he says, I know who I am. And he had taken a little bit too seriously what I was saying.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
just teasing him, but I never forgot what he said. I know who I am. And my working with the Republican Party at that time and my mayor right now, my council of Republicans, if that bothers you, then you got to get over it or don't. But I'm here to do good work.
When you say you know who you are, I think that it might be one of the singularly most important lessons that you could share with the audience, honestly, because when you boil being a city manager, a public sector executive down to its bare essence, don't you have to have some level of foundational understanding of what your view is on things, and your worldview is, and what moves you and what anchors you to um, your societal values, your belief systems? I mean, right? I mean, because I
Absolutely.
find this job could be so challenging if you can be so easily unmoored based off of all these different influences or pressure points that happen. And I don't want to go off into a conversation about contracts and salaries or whatnot, but one of the reasons why I argue that we should have really strong contractual provisions designed to protect us as much as possible is so that you can maintain that level of independence and personal integrity to what you believe and what you stand for. And I think too often, this is anecdotally, I just think too often individuals, they want to become a city manager because they want the title or the perceived power or recognition or the financial benefits that come with it, not so much because they truly want to effectuate real substantive change. And that might offend some people. And I don't, I'm not trying to offend anybody really in the grand scheme of things. I think obviously most people who do this line of work are truly trying to make some difference. But there is a difference between wanting to make a difference, right? And there's also a difference between the person who's just sort of like, that is their governing ethos, like that's what they're all about. Like
Hmm.
they're on a principled mission to accomplish something, right? And I have my own viewpoints, my own worldviews as far as local government and why I got into the arena, and I'll share that here briefly. I don't want to get into my personal story because this is about you and the Black City Manager. I want to focus on you, but I've shared this several times. One of the reasons why I got involved in being a city manager, and a side note, a lot of people will say, "Hey, Joe, they'll hit me up. They'll want to ask me a question through DMs on LinkedIn or whatever, and they'll say, I'm interested in becoming a city manager, blah blah blah." And one of the things I will respond with, Troy, is, "Well, why do you want to be a city manager? Like,
Hmm.
what's the motivation?" And more often than not, I get some variant of, "I want to help people. I want to make a difference." And I will say something to the effect of, "Well, that's not enough. Like, you can make a difference and help people by being a department head or a police officer or
A
whatever."
nonprofit.
Yeah, so why do you wanna be a city manager? What's moving you? And, for me personally, and I have no problem sharing this, I've shared it in multiple different formats now, is I have a limited government mindset, right? From a conservative background is where my personal sort of worldview emanates from, and I really wanted to be the change that I wanted to see in local government, right? I'd lamented what I perceived to be largesse and bloat and slow moving and lack of innovation and lack of true concern for the taxpayers' dollars, right? These are some of these were ill-conceived notions beforehand, and some are still valid in my opinion. But my point is, I felt that by being a city manager, I could really put some of these things to the test and truly make a difference and really determine whether or not that change could occur through that city manager's position. You tracking
Mhm.
me on that?
I
And so
am.
that's what motivated me. So I think when you come back to this walk that you're having with, and I don't know if you're a young boy or a young man when you had this walk with this gentleman, but when he tells you, "I know who I am," man, I think that's one of the most important things any aspiring executive or any current executive should understand is, like, what do you know who you are? Do you know what
Mhm.
governs you?
I was in elementary and middle school walking to church with him, and that whole sense of, yeah, I know who I am. I have a fascination with cities, curiosity of discussions of human nature and natural law. And when people jab at me saying I'm too philosophical, sometimes that's mudslinging to me, and I take it as a badge of honor. Uh, I really love the notion of committing my education and experience and curiosity and ambition into making the highest quality of life possible in cities so that you can take that stability that we talked about in the previous episode and then use that to springboard in whatever kind of life you want. And Joe, at the end of the day, you distill that down to freedom. My friend Stephanie calls this work, she lives right next door in Brentwood, Tennessee. She says she calls it kingdom building from her faith-based point of view, that we're doing kingdom building work. We're providing stable communities and stable government. So from whatever life you want, be it to open a beauty shop or become a professional football player or a janitor at the high school, you can do that in a free society. Because Stephanie worked in Africa with me, and we saw so many talented young people, so intelligent, and could do so much. And the only thing holding them back is the instability of the communities and the nation states that they live in. That is not their fault.
Hmm.
Tribal warfare and dysfunctional governments. Some of the most intelligent people I've met in Asia, throughout Asia and throughout Africa, and it is kingdom building. And we're not going to get off in religion here, but that very person that might have that ability to find that cure for whatever disease or whatever issue, or may develop that technology, they can't do it because they're in an unstable environment. And that kingdom building that Stephanie's talking about is for us to go over there and try to help stabilize it so that freedom can manifest itself and they can add value to the world. And that's what I want the city manager to do, particularly the Black city manager. We are asset driven and value added driven, and don't go in this for the wrong reason. Because if you read my site, and God knows it's all over the place, but there are times when I don't want to come across like I'm making fun of anyone on LinkedIn. But one of the reasons in terms of starting the Black City Managers is, if you look at some of my posts, I talked about too much largesse. People self-describe themselves as transformational, and they redo your whole community. It's like, okay, those are bold claims.
Hmm.
Whose lives have you changed, and what's so transformational? You gotta be serious about what you put out there, and who you are and why you go into this. I want to add value to the community I'm in through public safety and quality of life. But again, like I said, I can't love your house and your children more than you. So I'm not a motivational speaker. I may or may not be transformational. I'm
Right.
providing stability in a community, stability through an administration. I implement the laws passed by my council and hope to try to manifest the vision campaign by my mayor.
Hmm.
But I do see some city managers out there. I thought, don't overpromise, don't oversell yourself, and some of it comes across as way too much.
Transformational is a big word. It's probably overused. It's not probably. It is overused. I've probably even overused it a time or two, to be honest. But yeah, it's a great point, Troy. Great point. Hey, I'm kind of curious about this dynamic. As everyone knows, I read hundreds of news articles on a weekly basis, and anecdotally, this is just purely anecdotally. This is not even from personal conversations with anybody. It's just me following stories, because you got to remember, when I do a weekly news scan, stories unfold over a period of time. Oftentimes, there's a beginning and an end. It's not just one story out of the blue and that's it, right? Sometimes there's a little bit of a history or contextual sort of understanding of the situation. And I gotta tell you, Troy, I look at some of these stories where there is a predominantly Black majority governing body and a Black city manager. Again, anecdotally, quotes and whatever, I'm gonna hedge all that. I feel like oftentimes these Black city managers are getting scrutinized and even goes beyond scrutinized. Oftentimes it's going to being a certain level of mistreatment or unprofessional treatment, the way they kind of personally attack the manager. And I was wondering, do you have any thoughts, or have you had any experience, or what's your general take on this idea of governing bodies might be holding Black managers to a much different standard? Because you kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier on in this interview about, having that pressure put on you, and that scrutiny. And I'm wondering if you feel that's something I'm just sort of, am I making this up, or is what I'm seeing really there?
When you interview for a job, you make a great mistake when you go in and just let them interview you. You've got to interview them, whoever that is, be it a nonprofit, or if you're going to work for a church or a city government or whatever. You've got to interview who's going to be your boss. Who are you answering to? And particularly in the type work we do, I can't think of. I'd have to look it up. The name of a community. It was in Northern California, your state, that was looking for a city manager, and I believe they had, and we may have talked about this, Joe, 5 city managers in 5 years. And I went and started looking at their council meetings and looking at some of the issues and the culture and things that's going on. And I indeed ended up talking to their city attorney. And I told him I had some concerns. And I was, he was talking about the salary and what a privilege it was. And I said, yeah, this is me picking up my life, moving
Mhm.
3,000 miles away. And I'm watching a video of the mayor in that community telling one of the residents at a city council meeting, meet me outside in the parking lot.
Yeah.
And I thought, no, absolutely no. And I'm wondering, this dynamic you're talking about, are they putting too much on the city manager? It's like, what are you asking of him? And he has asked that when you interview for a job. I would have. Like I've said to you, when I talk about making demands in a neighborhood, meet me halfway. I can't save you. No city manager can save you. We're there to implement those laws and realize those visions and manage those departments. I'm not Houdini. I can't bring any magic tricks. So if you've got some cultural issues or things that are concerning you, is that the role of government at all?
Mhm.
And you, as a city manager, you've got to ask yourself that before you go into it, white, black, or indifferent. And that job in California, I gave it serious thought. And I thought, no way. The problems there is no stability, and it's beyond structural. And they're going to go through probably 10 more city managers. God help them. That's a leadership issue across the board, and I
Yeah.
wouldn't touch it with a barge pole, and I didn't. And I now that city attorney, who was a Harvard law graduate, by the way, he's gone. He and I had connected on LinkedIn, and I still follow him. It wasn't about a year later he was out of there too. And that's horrifying because it reminds me of my scenes of working overseas. When you don't have that stability, you won't have that growth
Mhm.
and growth in all areas. So the black city manager has to be careful. But they've got to interview their bosses, their councils, their commissioners, their mayor, and take a hard look at that community that they're going into. What are the issues there? Why are they bringing you in? Should be bringing in you in to manage the government. Now, if it's more than that, you got to step in and ask yourself, what am I doing here?
I sometimes wonder and think to myself when I'm looking at some of these stories involving the black city managers who are getting hired across the country, and I think, man, are they trying to hire a city manager who's going to lead the organization and carry out their vision, or are they looking for a savior who's somehow going to fix everything and make everything okay? And I guess that's kind of like was a thematic element that I was kind of like looking at in some of these articles. Is sort of like, what do you expect this person, just it's just a man or a woman who's sitting in the seat of the city manager chair or the town manager chair. What is it that you possibly expect that person to do for your organization? And there's a seemingly almost like kind of like, to use this meet me halfway, the pick up the can sort of thematic
Yeah,
element that you've had in these first two episodes. Sometimes I feel like the governing bodies in these situations feel like they don't really have any responsibility or obligation when it comes to this whole council manager equation.
it's so you brought that up. There's a community, and one that I absolutely love. And the mayor wanted to interview me for a position, and I considered it. And he talked to me about it, he and some of his commissioners. And then he talked about a particular side of town in his community that was predominantly black. And then he asked me in the conversations, what will you do for them? And I had to step back and go, well, the same thing I do for every other neighborhood. I mean, and I thought, is this why you're talking to me? You think I got some sort of magic silver bullet for that particular side of town? So when that call was over, the current city manager at the time, who's since moved on to the private sector and opened his own business, is a white guy, and he's a good friend of mine, by the way. I asked him flat out, when your mayor talked to me, did he ask the white folks he interviewed the same question? Did he ask them what are they going to do particularly for that particular side of town? Is that why you guys were talking to me?
Hmm.
Because I would be the city manager had I taken that position of the entire town, not just that one side of the neighborhood, well, one side of the community. And I cannot, some cultural fixes and things that needed to go on in that community, I can't fix that. Now you can call me over and say, if you call me over and say, hey, your sanitation department did not pick up trash on Wednesday, I can fix that in 5 minutes. Or if we're not doing something that we're supposed to be doing that we do in every other neighborhood, I can fix that in 5 minutes. But if there's some other structural and cultural things, it is absolutely unfair to lay that at the feet of the black city manager and go, you need to fix that too. Just like it's laid at the feet and sometimes on teachers and police.
Right. True. Very true. Right. Like a lot of parents, they dump their, not getting racial. It's all races. They dump their kids in a school system and they feel like the teacher's got to be the one that educates them and trains them up. And if the parents just got to pick them up after school and call it a day, right? Like there's a parental responsibility element there too.
That mayor, when he asked me that question, I thought, did he think that through? Is he asking the other folks that are going to interview before me or after me who are white? Did he ask them that question? What are you going to particularly do for this one side of town?
But let me ask
Uh,
you this, Troy. I got to play devil's advocate here or throw a curveball maybe. You know, it's very common. The topic, du jour right now of 2025 is DEI, right? Ease, equity, and everything else. So, is there an equity element though to that equation, right? Because you will often hear people will say, well, a certain sides of town or certain areas of town or certain neighborhoods don't get fair treatment, right? And so maybe you as a city manager need to step up and make sure that they get a little something extra to start leveling the playing field. Obviously this is a very vague, subjective, comments here, but where does equity and the whole DEI equation come into play when we're talking about what some would argue would be decades or generations of systemic, mistreatment, prejudice, discrimination, however you want to describe it?
and can't deny those things happen in the U.S., particularly can't deny they happened in Kentucky. And when I say, if you're saying there's something not going on in your neighborhood that is under the purview of the city manager, tell me again specifically. If you tell me that trash collection or the paving of the streets or any of those things, the building of the parks isn't happening equitably on your side of town, I can fix that in 5 minutes. Let me speak to the city where I'm the city administrator. We pave roads and build sidewalks based on a street scoring system, which takes politics 100% out of it. And right now we're using AI to do so. And it scores the streets and it tells us which are the worst streets and which should have our most immediate attention. And 9 times out of 10, that number is always highest in the inner city neighborhoods, predominantly black and poor white neighborhoods. So if you look at our street paving, our municipal road aid, and the additional funding we put in to pave streets and do sidewalks, we are primarily in the east side and west side of town, which are predominantly black or poor white. We are inordinately paving streets. The majority of the parks that we built since I've been here are in those same neighborhoods. And I think we are being quite equitable. Now, are there certain other factors that are beyond the purview of the government? That's where you have to have the ability and the backbone and the willpower to go, that's not something I can fix. That's where we can help wherever we can, but that's not our role. What are you asking of me? Tell me if we're not being fair and just in your neighborhood, if it's a service we provide to all the other neighborhoods, and I can look into that in 5 minutes. And if we're not, I promise you, it'll get done. But if it's something bigger and something more, that's a completely different conversation. And as I mentioned before, where the mayor had told me there were a few residents who had said some things, I think if they did say those things, it was beyond my scope as a city manager. I can help where I can, but there's a role. And I would say to those black city managers who are out there on LinkedIn talking about you are bold and transformational and life changing, rein that in a little bit. Don't overstate it and don't oversell it, because you can't go in and you're not, you can't go in and transform a whole city. You've got a limited role, a limited budget, and you've got governance structure that you have to implement. And I don't want to sound too bureaucratic and boring, but there's only so much you can do. What you can do though is sit down with the community and go, well, let's start making demands of each other. Meet me halfway
Right.
and be more demanding in that area.
Troy, your page is called the Black City Managers, and we're going to call this series, I think, the Black City Manager, series on the podcast. So but you are a Black City Manager, and obviously you don't speak for every Black person. Just like nobody should be asked to speak for everybody of any different classification, whether it's gender or race or religion or what have you. But I am kind of curious because I'm assuming we're going to have more white people listening to this podcast than Black people, right? And we're going to have more white executives listening to this podcast and minority executives. And I would kind of like to get your take on this. We both talked about the need and the importance of treating all neighborhoods the same and making sure that they get sort of the fair treatment, not equal results, but fair treatment, right? And like you talk about this, like this, the scoring system for road improvements, right?
Hmm.
Which obviously to me it sounds like it's, and if we're being very intellectually honest, roads got so bad in that area for uh, whatever reason, and now that's being corrected because they were allowed to be degraded to such a point that now they're at the top of the list of getting repaired, right? So
Absolutely.
let's not ignore the obvious, right? And that could be a racial component, it could be another issue, whatever. But there are a lot of white executives who work in communities with large minority populations or large Black populations or what have you. Are there differences in the manner or methodology or the personal tact or whatnot in which a white city manager should communicate to a minority population or a Black population in their community versus other parts of the community? It was either for cultural reasons, political reasons, whatever. Do you have any thoughts on that? On how a white executive would better connect and communicate with that segment of the population?
It for me is, I'm just going to be straight with you and I'm going to be direct with you. Like, I'm confident enough in myself and my resume that you don't need to hire me because I'm Black. And I hope, I don't know if anyone's in Kentucky or anywhere else I've ever been hired has done that. That my education attainment and my experiences, I would put up against anybody anywhere. And there are 82 city managers in Kentucky. That includes deputy and assistants. I would put my resume up against every single one of them, and I am the only Black one. And I'd stand confident that I could interview for any job in this state. I don't want that to sound cocky. It's just of the work I put in it. I won't undermine it. And in terms of how do I speak with a community? It's the same respect. You're right. Those roads were allowed to get to that point. And I'm happy that we've come in and using this AI and using this system that we can justify the work we're doing, and it is equitable. For us, with a scoring system in the city of Hopkinsville, I think it is to be as equitable as possible. But to your point of how did those roads get there? It may have been unjust, absolutely. Various reasons that we'd have to look at, but we're definitely righting those roads, particularly since the money from CARES and ARPA that came since COVID. We've been doing heavily investments in the inner city. But let's go to your question. Should white city managers and addressing minority neighborhoods, Black, Hispanic, or what have you, address them differently? Where are you in that regard? Are you in Mississippi or are you in Maine? And what's the situation there? If you, and you know your city and your situation better, if you can justifiably say part of this reason for this neighborhood being in its state is the indifference and unfairness of historical situations, then fix it as best you can. Yeah, absolutely fix it. When you go back to my philosophy, where I was talking to the leadership Hopkinsville, where I talked about pick up the can, that's a different situation. No historical issues are going to change that. If there's something going on in your neighborhood that you can change, you yourself, right now, today, pick up the can.
Right.
Literally pick up the can. And it's a metaphor. Somewhat it's a metaphor. If there's a can laying down by your park, pick it up. And let me tell you where that came from. I had a Black city council member representing a particular ward, and he talked to me very angrily. And he was angry at my public works department. He's no longer on council. And he was angry at city government about, I believe, a mattress was thrown out near the park, or somewhere, or maybe on a vacant lot in his ward. And, it's like, okay, we can get sanitation over there to pick it up. But he wanted to go on further about the situation and about the treatment and make it into a bigger issue. And finally, I just stopped and said, council member, where do you think that mattress came from? Because there is a neighborhood about 15 minutes away on the other side of the city that is very upscale, and probably the houses start at 800,000 or so and go up. And I said, do you think they drove that mattress across the city and threw it in your ward? Because they didn't. Where do you think that came from? And it's easier for you to yell at me and yell at our public works team, but you don't want to go sit and have a discussion with your constituents.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just easy for you to beat up on me and beat up on Mike, director at Public Works, than having a heart. I have offered him several town halls when he was there to sit down and say, hey, metaphorically, pick up the can, meet
Yeah.
us halfway. That, we pick up trash that's in cans, but it's your neighborhood. You got to love it. You got to respect it. And you can't toss a mattress out there on a vacant lot or anywhere in the park. I'm trying to tell him, you've got to meet me halfway and work with me. I'll go to the town hall with you. I'll give you the community center in your ward. And we can do that. We can set it up because we do work with council members to do that. But it's easier for him to beat up on the city than to have that hard conversation with his wards. And as far as white city managers are concerned in this country, you got to look at your own situation. Is it something that you can document that has historical mistreatment in that particular community, in that neighborhood, in your community? Then address it.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's not, if it's the pick up the can pitch situation, address that too.
Right.
Meet me halfway. Be demanding. Be as demanding as you would in any other neighborhood. And let me tell you, I sent the mayor last week a picture of a sign as you enter into a very nice neighborhood in Louisville, that it's a neighborhood watch sign. And it basically said, we have a neighborhood watch. We will call the police. We will prosecute. And I told him, I said, we should make some signs like that and give them out to the neighborhoods, particularly in the Black neighborhoods. Because I want to sit down with these neighborhood associations and going, this non-snitching business is not going to work for me. It's not going to work for me. The police can only do so much, and you got to help them. This situation with Charlie Kirk and how horrifying that is. Today, the FBI announced they believe they got the guy. Well, how'd they get him? How'd they get him? Because his family and friends, they snitched on him.
Mm-hmm.
Thank God that he's out there saying he'd done something, and they did the right thing. They called the authorities. And that's the only way you're going to have effective policing in your neighborhood.
Is if the neighborhood's invested and participates and helps out, right?
You got to pick up the damn can. Meet us halfway. And if you know something, say something and be serious about it. There's only so much we can do. And if you don't meet us halfway, you can't measure yourself up to the neighborhoods that do.
Right.
Because there are certain neighborhoods that, Joe, if you're driving a yellow Pinto and you drive through a high-end neighborhood and you shoot or you throw trash out, those neighbors, when the police come and go, did you see anything? Yeah, there's this ugly guy. Looks like he's from California driving a yellow Pinto. I think he has a podcast. And they're going to snitch and they're going to tail. Yeah, they're going to tail, and we're going to use our flock cameras and we're going to track you down.
You're right.
And they
100%.
met us halfway. And it's not that we're favoring that neighborhood over other neighborhoods. It's that they help me.
Yeah.
And that's all I'm asking. Meet me halfway, whatever that means to you.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I used to be a first 48 hours, or the first 48 news junkie, where it profiles all the different, murders that are committed across the different, towns that are profiled on that show.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, I watch it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just can't believe people are literally going to say, hey, I didn't see nothing. I don't know nothing, because of the whole don't snitch culture in some of these communities. And it's like, how do you expect individuals who don't live in your community, right, who are trying to do the job, how do you expect them to invest the time, energy, and resources when nobody in the community is offering up any help? It's much easier for them to take their time and resources to the other side of town, where people are actively trying to assist them so they can actually get the result. It's fascinating.
I can't be effective if you don't work with me and tell me what you saw. Then I can't do the job for you effectively. And then the only other alternative is to put a police officer on every corner 24 hours a day, and then that's going to get a complaint.
Yes, because
If
then you
you're
have a police state, right? A military police
Yeah, you're
state,
militarizing that
Yeah.
neighborhood. So there's no win. There's no win situation there. So you've got to work with us. And then that's where I mean to the Black city managers, be more demanding. You've got that credibility of going in into these neighborhoods and saying in these town hall meetings or neighborhood association meetings that how we've operated in the past isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And you've got to trust me in this position that you've got to work with us, or we're never going to move forward. And
Y-
what's happened in the past, I can rectify that as best I can, but we got to move forward. We got to look forward. We got to build a city of today.
Something that concerns me, Troy, and I think we'll flesh it out in bits and pieces over future episodes, is it just seems to me that over the last 25 years or so, there's just been a massive shift in the mentality of the American citizen. And there's almost this idea or notion that local government or government in general should basically solve or do all these different things, all these different problems, all these issues. It's just like, well, I'm not sure. And I don't want to go on a political riff right now in the second episode of this series, but I think there's been some sort of degradation of the sort of the social organizations and the safety net that we've had over the years with fraternal organizations and churches and whatnot, where that's kind of gone by the wayside, where a lot of these organizations used to pick up the slack and be involved in a lot of this sort of like individual localized charity and community cleanup and things of that sort of nature. And also just maybe there's just been a loss of just civic pride in general. I don't know, but I find it very troubling that in our society, it seems to me that the default position of the American citizen seems to be, well, call city hall, they should fix it, or call your congressman, or call the president or whatever. And I'm just like, well, whatever happened to the old classic mantra, uttered by Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you,
Hmm.
ask what you can do for your country. Like, where did that go? And I don't expect you to give a long detailed riff on that. I just think that's a theme that bothers me greatly when I look at how things have shifted in this country, I think, over the last 25 years.
But let's do get on a small riff on that politically. I had a friend that worked with me overseas, and she ran for office in Chicago, and I actually supported her campaign. But part of the problem I had with her, and I told her, don't you feel you're overpromising? See, you can't get elected and complain that people are asking too much over government, but while you were campaigning, you promised them everything under the sun.
That's a great point.
Everything under the sun. And now you're in that chair and they're asking too much of you. You, to get to that chair, promised them everything under the sun. And now they're
Great
calling
point.
in the marker. And so you got to be mindful when you're campaigning of what you can and what you can't do.
I never
And
thought about that.
I never overpromise in this job of what my role is as city administrator. Uh, I cannot, again, how many times have we said it? Love your family more than you.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to overpromise it. I do say meet me halfway. And again, whatever that means to you in this neighborhood, that may mean 10%. There's been too much overpromising of what we can do. And the definition of society is other people. These are this is a republic that we live in, and it requires a duty, a call to duty, and a duty of place. And I'm writing an article for the local newspaper. I do a monthly column here. My next column is on a culture of maintenance in terms of helping to clean up the city. That there's a responsibility to government
Yeah.
and to residents, and don't overpromise. And Joe, it goes back to what we were talking about. Particularly is one of the things I addressed on the Black City Manager page. This whole overpromising. I'm transformational, life changing, bold, strategic, and it's like, listen, we pick up trash and we pave streets and we patrol. And don't sit there and overpromise your role as city manager because you're going to fail miserably. But I want high standards. Just don't overshoot it.
Troy, that's such a great point, and this is going to sound silly for me to say, but you articulate so well, and I don't think I've ever even sort of crystallized the idea or notion of overpromising on the part of elected officials. We all talk about them overpromising or promising everything under the sun, but you're right. It's ridiculous to run on a campaign where you're basically promising the world to everybody and then complain when they start asking to collect on that promise that you made, right? So I totally get that. But
and you and I may have a situation where some of our fellow city managers in their interviews are overpromising.
Oh, zing, pow.
And so then when you ask me
Woo!
if some black city managers are getting a lot of pressure from their black city council member, what they tell them in the interview.
That's a great point, Troy. That is a phenomenal point. Hey, Troy, I'm really enjoying this series. This is part 2. Thank you very much. You have any final comments before we part?
All right.
I'm Joe Turner. This is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast. Troy Body has been my guest. He is the Black City Manager, and he has the Black City Managers page on LinkedIn. He's the City Manager for Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Love having him on the show. Love hearing his perspective. And stay tuned for the next episode. Hopefully we'll get it out there in a few weeks. All right? Catch you next week.